Hi dear viewers. Today I'm joining a conversation with author Joshua Kidd, the author of The Lone Wolf Society. It's a pleasure to have Joshua on the show. Welcome on the show, Joshua.
Thank you
Nice.
very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you featured in English literature. Quite a joy to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Joshua, could you tell us about your book, The Lone Wolf Society? How does this book come about? What inspired you to write The Lone Wolf Society?
Definitely. So, the Lone Wolf Society, first of all, I am 42 years old
Oh,
and I'm a retired attorney. I used to be an attorney,
oh,
retired. And when I retired back in 2020,
yeah.
I I had always thought about, well, what am I going to do with my life? Because it's halfway over. I do music. I like to do music. I write and record albums with music and stuff like that. So
Mm.
I've always wanted to write a book. Always
Oh,
wanted to. And I never thought I'd get around to doing it until much later in life. But it was nice to kind of to fall into my lap the opportunity. So I said, okay, I want to write a book. This is always something I've wanted to do. So I'm going to do it. And I started off in the inspiration for the Lone Society, Wolf Society is essentially my whole entire life.
oh,
Um, and I think sometimes with your first book, I don't know about other people, but with my first book, it was number one, a life goal to write a book. Number two, it's a tribute to my father.
oh,
So it's personal in a lot of ways. However, I also realize that no one's going to probably want to care about reading my life story, right? Because I mean, it's just, I mean, it's kind of exciting, and there's a
mm,
lot of stuff based on my life in there. But
mm.
I wanted to make it fiction because I wanted to be able to throw in, a lot of other crazy stuff and, wild stuff that viewers are maybe shocked by. But and so I started about writing it in December of 2020,
Oh,
and had never written a book, and just poured it out. And let me tell you, it poured out of me. It
wow,
was it was like this. It was like 42 years, or well, at that time I was 40. It was like 40 years of life just pouring out.
wow.
All my experiences, my, whether it be bad or good. And
Mm.
so that was my inspiration for the Lone Wolf Society. Partially, it's a tribute to my father, who's still alive, but he's not in the best health. But it's a tribute to him, and it's also a commentary on everything, life, society. It's an anti-racist book. It's an
Wow.
anti exploitation book, and so I wanted to point out my life experiences with
Mm.
those areas and kind
That's
of
gr-
thought.
that's great. I really love the sound of this book, and especially
Thank
knowing
you.
that it's a tribute to your father. That sounds very amazing to me. Next, I want to ask you, Joshua, for readers like me who haven't read The Lone Wolf Society yet, without giving much information away, and I know you've talked a little bit about it, but then without giving much information away, could they have a sneak
There
of
was
what we'd expect picking up the book?
so yeah, like without giving away too much,
Yeah.
the book is essentially about a guy who is in his mid 40s, and he has a nice legal career. He's got a nice firm in California. He's got a nice life, two
Mm.
kids, kind of just like, a really, really enjoyable life, except that he has a chronic condition
Oh,
called ankylosing spondylitis. That is a real condition. That is something that I personally have. Um, and it's like severe arthritis in your body, and so like it attacks your joints, and you just get pretty severe arthritis. And I got that at an early age, but so does the main character Fred Rogers.
oh,
And a lot of people say, well, why did you name him Fred Rogers? Because that's, Mr. Rogers, right? And that's, a huge American pop cultural icon.
mm.
And I wanted to do it partially. I did it kind of to be silly,
Wow,
but also, to point out that everybody has good and bad in them.
absolutely.
And that's what the book is an exploration of. You have Fred, who has a legal practice, good solid family, But then he gets news that his father is dying,
Oh,
and so he decides that he's going to retire, go and to take care of his father back in Kentucky.
wow.
And so he flies to Kentucky, and he's taking care of his dying father, and it's a huge strain on him because he loves his father. It's one of the most important people to him. It's his idol, and
Oh,
so Fred is really distraught over this. And one day he gets a text from a friend, and what you do is you find out that this friend went to law school with Fred,
mm,
and that during law school, against the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, against the backdrop of just American life, which I'm sure you probably understand can be absolutely insane a lot of times. I mean, it's just America's wild, right? It's just like wild, crazy place, and that's just the facts. So in law school, he starts to do pretty poorly in his
oh,
grades. Doesn't do too well, and has some health problems. But bottom line is that being an atheist, Fred being an atheist and being kind of a militant socialist type,
mm,
he forms this group called the Lone Wolf Society. And
oh,
it's not really a group because lone wolf and organization don't really go together, because you're saying lone wolf, but
yeah.
they formed this group, and their whole thing is look, we
Wow.
can't change the system through voting. We can't change, so we need to be able to fight injustice, fight racism, fight corruption.
Mm,
And the only way they think they can do it is through assassination.
wow.
And so that's I can give you that much to kind of wet your whistle and kind of get you interested. But that's how I would sum it up. And so the book starts off with a bang. I mean, there's a person assassinated immediately in the first chapter,
Oh, wow.
and then the second chapter it does a flashback to law school.
Oh,
So when it starts, Fred has been graduated from law school for about 10 years and is a little bit far removed from those days where he formed the Lone Wolf Society.
wow.
So, but then it goes back, and you get flashbacks throughout the book. Fred faces a lot of demons, and
Wow.
that's where I can talk a lot about racism and
Wow.
inequality and stuff like that. You
That's great. I'm so enthralled and, I'm taken away with this great illustration and description of the book. It sounds very
Thank you.
amazing. I don't want you to stop it.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's great. So also want to ask you, Joshua, as authors, we'll all have different ways of reacting to feedbacks and criticism of our works. I'm curious to know your opinion about criticism. How do you react to negative criticism of your book if you've ever had one in time past?
So if I was 20 years younger,
Yeah.
I would have reacted to negative criticism with fire. I would have been blasting them back, been mad, been like, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about.
Uh,
That's who I was at that young age, and that's it's just life. But now I I just take it passively. I believe everyone's entitled to their opinion. And the thing about the Lone Wolf Society specifically is that I wrote it to where you can interpret it many different ways. You can look
oh,
at Fred as a hero. You can look at him as a terrorist. You can look at him as just a really nice guy. You can look at him as someone who suffers from mental illness and therefore, needs to address those issues. There's just so much. There's so many ways you can interpret it
oh,
that I wanted to leave that open. So I did get one criticism that I thought was I thought was funny, but it was still a good review. It gave me 4 stars, but it bashed Fred, like it bashed the main character, like this guy's
oh.
a piece of crap and stuff like that. I didn't A lot of people thought it was a bad review, but I didn't think it was, because that's a fair interpretation. You can interpret the book that way. And so I wasn't offended. Some people thought I should be, but I wasn't offended.
That's great.
So
That's quite amazing.
yeah.
I understand that readers have different ways of interpreting works that they read, and I love that. I'm also curious to know if you experienced any challenges while writing your book. If there is any, could you share with us what challenge it is and how you ultimately overcame it?
Definitely. Yeah, challenges for me, ankylosing spondylitis is probably my biggest challenge throughout life, and it affects everything I do. I've had both my hips replaced. I have severe arthritis like down my neck and spine.
Oh,
And so the biggest challenge for me was writing was spending hours kind of hunched over like that, which is not good for my spine.
oh, wow.
So it was more of a physical thing, but I tell you what, I love this experience so much. It was so cathartic for me. It was like, being an attorney and seeing a lot of crazy stuff and seeing abused children and
Yeah,
injustice and it has a huge effect on your mental health. It
absolutely.
really does.
Yeah.
And you see that in Fred. And so it was awesome just writing and writing and writing and pouring it out. And the second thing, though, that would be the writing challenge. I would say that the other challenge I had was getting people to read my book. That's a challenge. And I'm talking about like before I publish, I try to get people to read it to get feedback. Some people did, a few, but it's funny. You think like, oh yeah, my friends and my family, they're totally gonna read it and they're gonna love it, and they're gonna give you all this awesome feedback. But really, people are just really too busy. Or they say, oh, I'll read it when it comes out.
Uh,
So that was hard getting feedback before.
I
uh,
understand.
and then marketing has been a challenge, although it's been fun. I actually like the marketing side. It's been fun to
Mm,
meet new authors and meet like people like yourself, like meet you, and it's just been a cool experience. I've met a lot of cool people.
yeah, that's great. That's
Mhm.
quite amazing. I love these experiences you're mentioning. They're quite very nice. And the one
Thank
you
you.
mentioned about the friend is very funny because I can relate to it as well.
Mm.
Yeah. So at this point, I'd love you to show the book to the camera if you have a copy there with you.
Absolutely. I've got a cat with me. That's another thing about the book is that it's there's cats, and you can probably
Oh, I
see a
hope your
little.
cat will be visible because of your background. I just hope. Yeah, I can see the Lone Wolf Society, but there's a blue covering over there. That's
Hold on
probably
just for
from
a
your
second.
Zoom background. And I can see your cat.
Let's see.
Oh, the
The
Lone Wolf.
Society.
This
Oh man, I'm sorry.
this
I'm
Zoom
sorry. I don't know
background
why.
sometimes can be very funny.
Yeah,
It's not making
I'm
it to
trying to
come
look.
up. I'm seeing a part of it. But maybe when you bring it much closer to camera, maybe that'll be fine. Yeah, that's it. I can see now. I can see, but along the side it gets fainty. Yeah, the Lone Wolf Society. Beautiful.
The cover. Okay, so there's a story behind that. I picked a generic cover
Oh,
because I I hired someone to do cover artwork for me,
yeah.
and I just I don't know. I'm really picky, and so I said, you know what? I don't want to do that. I'm actually waiting on a new cover right now that's going to be drawn by this artist who lives in Kentucky, and
Hmm.
so that'll be nice. So it will change. A lot of people have criticized it for saying, "Oh, the cover looks terrible," or
Ah,
it's really generic. But I'm like, it'll. I promise I'll get a new cover. It's just getting the right one. You
oh,
know.
that's great. Next, I want to ask you, Joshua, apart from the Lone Wolf Society, do you have any other works you've altered or currently working on?
I do actually. The writing experience, I actually thought I would go back to writing music after I wrote this book, but I definitely am working on a new book. It takes place in Kentucky as well, because that's where I grew up, and that's
Oh,
Appalachia, and that's where my family's from on my dad's side. So I kind of know the culture well. That's what I know the best.
hmm.
And it's such a niche market, you know what I mean? Like it's such a narrow market. But so I decided to write another book set in Appalachia, and it's not going to be as crazy as the Lone Wolf Society. I promise. It's
Wow.
not. The characters will be a lot tamer. I always tell people that the Lone Wolf Society is sort of like American Psycho plus 1984 plus Appalachia. And so this is going to be a lot calmer, and it's going to be a feel-good story, and it's going to be written by a Christian point of view.
Wow.
Mhm.
That's great. That's quite amazing. I love
Thank you.
that. Now, Joshua, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? What are the challenges you've encountered in terms of marketing your books, and what are the mediums you've utilized so far in promoting the Lone Wolf Society?
Publishing was a journey for me. I think there's some people that just self-publish right away and they don't really try to get agents. But I didn't. I really tried to get agents, and I sent off query letters and sent copies of the Lone Wolf Society to quite a bit of agents and literary agents, and then publishing houses. I did get some feedback. I did get some people that were interested. Ultimately, so some people really didn't like my Fred character, my main character.
Wow.
Which again, it's okay to interpret it that way. So I didn't have a problem with them doing that. I guess they just thought it wasn't as marketable. But so that actually took, and I joined some contests too to try to win some publishing contests. But I did that for about a year. I really tried to find a publisher for about a year, couldn't find one. And then on my birthday of last year, I said, you know what? I'm just going to publish. I'm going to self-publish, and if something changes, awesome. If not, cool. And because I'm retired, I have a lot of free time, which I'm lucky. I'm very privileged and lucky to have that.
Oh, wow.
So I can market. I can market almost full time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is nice. But
Yeah.
I would say the biggest challenge with publishing houses is that they only read a very, very small portion of your book, and then they judge it totally based on that. And I understand the science behind it. I understand there's psychology and all that.
Honestly. And that's
it's
very, very
frustrating.
funny.
Yeah.
Honestly.
It just, yeah.
Wow.
So that's, that was the frustrating thing, is them being like, well, I'm not interested. And I'm like, well, but you didn't even read it. But I understand they have a lot of time and stuff that they got to do stuff. As far as marketing, the biggest challenges is really money, where to spend your money on marketing. The best marketing I've done is it's just like what they used to call knocking on doors, which is just going out, approaching people directly. And I do this on the Facebook groups a lot, is approaching people directly, especially authors, and just saying, hey, I would love to read your book. Would you like to read my book? And kind of get it out there. And thankfully Facebook has some targeted groups like thrillers, and there's this one group that's called
absolutely
Disturbing Reads.
Absolutely.
You can about that. Yeah. And so I've been targeting people like that, and then just friends and family, but I haven't really paid for a lot of advertising. Honestly, I contacted local newspapers and stuff. They didn't seem to be that interested, but newspapers, they want you to spend money. So instead of them doing a news article about a local author who's just published a book, they're like, well, we may do a story on that, but we'd rather you just purchase an ad. And I just don't have the money to do all that. But I think what I'm doing is fairly effective right now. I think it is.
That's great. I love the sound of that. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Now, Joshua, is there anything that you love to share with the viewers about your book that we couldn't mention at this interview, and I'd love the viewers to know?
Yeah, absolutely. This book, it really, there's so much packed into it, and it's over 400 pages. Yeah. But there's a reason, and that's because I'm descriptive enough about things to make it. I try to paint a very rich world, one with a lot of detailed characters that have a lot of quirks to them, have a lot of weird, like in doing that, it became a longer book, but there's something for everybody. I like to say that if you're a member of Generation X in America, You
Mm.
will totally love this book because you'll totally
Wow.
get the references. I do a lot of music references, a lot of British like 80s music references because I love that. That's that's
Beautiful.
like my favorite music is 80s pop music. So, but I also do a lot of heavy metal references. I do some punk references. And if you're a big pop culture consumer, then you'll appreciate some of those things. I have a Star Trek reference.
Wow.
Like and I have some inside jokes in there, but Generation X, it's a good book for them. It's a good book for anyone living in Appalachia or Kentucky. It's definitely targeted for those people.
Wow.
So if you're from Kentucky, then you should definitely pick up a copy of this book.
That's great.
And then anyone with ankylosing spondylitis or like serious health challenges and problems,
Mm.
those people will relate to my book, I think, a lot.
Wow. Thank you so much for mentioning this. I'm really excited you mentioned this. Now, Joshua, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book like yours? What did you tell people in this category?
I would tell people, I would first of all tell people to write whatever you want. Don't write don't write to sell a book. Don't write
Mm,
stuff that you think will people consume. Just
mm,
write what you want. And if it's good enough, and if there's enough heart in it, if there's enough soul in it,
yeah,
someone will probably find a connection with it, and you will find
absolutely.
readers. It may not be a huge readership, but
Mm,
you will find them. And so just keep going with that. Like write what you want, and then with publishing, if you want to do publishing, then send out your query letters. Make sure that you've got uh, your manuscript really nice, formatted, edited. Make sure it's really polished. Then send out the query letters, and give it a good 5 to 6 months.
mm,
And if you don't get anything back, if no one bites back, then I would advise to do what I did, which is just move on and just self-publish because
wow.
it really has been an okay experience. I mean, you're not going to make a lot of money on it probably, but like I said, I've met so many cool people, and I've had people read my book that have really said, "Listen, I've really related to this book.
Mm,
This spoke to me. This was
absolutely.
excellent." And I had this one lady say, and this was great. She said, "This movie had me laughing, or this book
Wow.
had me laughing hysterically,
That's
one
great.
minute, and then disgusted the next." So, yeah.
Wow, that's great. I love the sound and the feedbacks you've got so far. It really made for an interesting read. Now, Joshua, where can readers get a copy of your book, should in case viewers would love to get a copy? On what platform are they available on?
So it's available on Amazon, and you can go to Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, and you can get a paperback version. And I'm also working on, at this moment, I am working on an audiobook version.
Oh,
And I've got
great.
5 chapters recorded. So
Wow.
yeah, that has been a lot of fun too, because I've got my music studio at my house,
Wow.
and it's just easy to,
Yeah, to do it
record.
yourself.
So
Yeah.
so I'm hoping that with the progress, I can get an audiobook out by summertime.
Wow.
Mhm.
That's great. That's a great one. And I look forward to that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for viewers who would love to get a copy of Joshua Keats' book, I left a link in the description part of this interview where you can get a copy directly on Amazon. So thank you so much, Joshua, for accepting the
Yeah.
invitation to be featured on English Literature. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a joy to have
Yes, thank
you.
you so much for having me. This has been great.
Yeah.